There's a suspicious man trying to break into the Whitaker house at 14 Brer Bluff died. He's pulling things out of a pickup, and he doesn't belong here.
That's the 911 call. That's what the HOA president of Briar Bluff Lake Estates told dispatch at 2:47 on a Tuesday in October. 3 deputies responded. They drove up to the lake house I had bought 11 days earlier and approached me with hands resting near their sidearms while I was unloading a box of my late son's books from my truck. I showed them my license, my closing folder, the deed. They apologized. They left. The HOA president, watching from across the street, smiled like she had just won something. What that woman did not know was that the deed she had just sicked 3 deputies to challenge contained one specific clause her HOA had failed to read for 39 years. As soon as I made one phone call, I was going to own her entire street. Tell me, what would you have done? The lake house was supposed to be the start of my second chapter. I bought it on a Tuesday in late September, closed on a Wednesday in early October, and moved in alone on the second Tuesday of the month with a borrowed pickup truck, 11 boxes, and a folder of paperwork that said I was now the owner of 140 feet of shoreline on Lake Kiowee, South Carolina. My name is Pierce Holloway. I'm 58 years old, a recently retired Delta Airlines captain with 32 years on the line, and the kind of pilot who reads the maintenance manual cover to cover before he flies the airframe. My wife Carlene and I have been married 33 years. She is currently in Spartanburg, helping our daughter Margot through the last 6 weeks of a difficult pregnancy. Margot is 28, a paramedic in Charlotte, expecting our first grandchild. The baby will be a boy. They have decided to name him Beckett after our son. Our son Beckett died in a small plane crash 8 years ago at the age of 22. I had been teaching him to fly since he was 16. He was on a solo cross-country to Asheville when a downdraft caught him on short final at a strip he had landed at 3 times before. He did everything right. The wind did not care. I have spent 8 years not quite forgiving myself for not being in the right seat that afternoon. Carlene has spent 8 years patiently teaching me that forgiveness is not a thing you get in one piece. It comes in small pieces, over years, mostly from grandchildren you have not met yet. I picked the lake house because Beckett had loved this lake. We had rented a cabin a quarter mile up the shoreline the summer he turned 15, and he had spent 6 straight days teaching himself to wakeboard while I drank coffee on the dock and Carlene read paperback mysteries in the shade. The cabin we had rented was gone now, torn down for a McMansion, but the house at the end of Briar Bluff Drive, the original 1968 Whitaker house, the oldest property on the street, had come on the market the same week I filed my retirement paperwork. I took it as a sign. The Whitaker house was built in 1968 by a man named Howell Whitaker, a small developer out of Greenville, who had bought 140 acres of pine-covered hillside in the late 60s and built one single lake house at the lake end of the parcel for himself and his wife. He sold the upland parcels off in the 1970s and 1980s, and the upland parcels eventually became Briar Bluff Lake Estates, a quiet HOA neighborhood of 23 homes on a single street called Briar Bluff Drive. The Whitaker house at the end of the street had passed through 3 owners over 56 years, the last of whom had been an aging widow named Lurleen Trask, who had moved to a memory care facility in Anderson the previous spring. I bought her house from her estate. The HOA, Briar Bluff Lake Estates, had been founded in 1985 by the second-generation developer who had subdivided the upland parcels. The HOA was small, tightly run, and proud of itself in the way some small HOAs are proud of themselves, like a country club without the bar. It had a president named Tamsin Cruz Boutwell. It had a board of 3. It had an annual newsletter printed on cream-colored paper. It had a community fit review process for new buyers that nobody on the board would ever describe out loud the way it actually worked. My closing had been rushed through by Lurleen's estate attorneys in late September to settle the estate before quarter end. The HOA's community fit review process had been bypassed entirely. By the time Tamsin Cruz Boutwell figured out that a new owner had moved into the Whitaker house, the deed had already been recorded for 9 days. She figured it out on a Tuesday afternoon when she drove past my driveway and saw a Carhartt-jacketed man unloading boxes from a pickup. She called 911 within 4 minutes. I heard the cruisers before I saw them. You don't fly 32 years on the line without developing an ear for distant engines, and a sheriff's V8 in second gear at low throttle has a particular sound, like a heavy tide rolling up a gravel beach, 3 of them in sequence, slowing as they came up the long curve of Briar Bluff Drive. I set down the box of Beckett's flight school textbooks and stepped out from behind the open tailgate of my pickup. The deputies pulled up in a loose triangle and stopped about 30 feet back. They did not get out immediately. The lead deputy spoke into his shoulder mic for about 15 seconds. Then all 3 came out at the same time, slowly, with their hands resting low and easy near their sidearms. The lead deputy was a tall, mid-40s man with the kind of square jaw and quiet bearing you only get from 20 years on a small county force. His name tag read Crane. "Sir, step away from the vehicle, please." "Yes, sir." I stepped 6 feet to my left, away from the pickup, hands visible, palms turned. I have flown into airports on 3 continents with armed personnel watching the apron, and I have learned the same lesson everyone learns in those moments. Be small, be visible, be patient. "Sir, can I see some identification?" "Yes, sir. My driver's license is in my wallet, in my back pocket. My closing paperwork for this house is in a manila folder on the passenger seat of the truck. Would you like me to retrieve either or both?" Sergeant Crane studied me for about 3 seconds. Then he said, in a tone that had clearly already begun to suspect this was not what it had been called in as, "License first, slowly." I produced it. He examined it. He compared the address on it to a paper in his hand, and the address on the mailbox at the foot of the drive. "Sir, may I see the closing folder?" "Yes, sir." I retrieved it, slowly, two-handed. He read the top page, the recorded deed dated October 3rd, with my name on the buyer line. He flipped through to the title insurance policy, the wire transfer confirmation, and Lurleen Trask's estate executor's signature on the deed. He handed the folder back. He exhaled. "Sir, I owe you an apology. The call we received indicated a suspicious individual attempting to break into a vacant property. The information was clearly incorrect. May I ask how long you have owned the residence?" 11 days. I have been moving in by myself this week. My wife joins me in 4 weeks. She's helping our daughter with the last weeks of her pregnancy. Sergeant Crane nodded slowly. He looked across the street. The HOA president was standing on her porch. She was a heavy-set blonde in a navy blazer and white slacks, holding a coffee cup, watching the 3 cruisers in her driveway and the man in the Carhartt jacket the way a magistrate watches a criminal docket. She was smiling. Sergeant Crane's jaw tightened, very slightly. "Mr. Holloway, would you object if I went and had a brief word with the reporting party?" "No, sir. Please do." He walked across the street. I did not hear the conversation. The 2 other deputies stayed by their cruisers. I went back to unloading the box of Beckett's textbooks. Sergeant Crane spoke to Tamsin Cruz Boutwell for about 3.5 minutes. From across the street I could see her gesturing, then folding her arms, then gesturing again with the coffee cup. He did most of the listening. At the end, he handed her a piece of paper, said something brief, and walked back across the street. He stopped by my pickup. "Mr. Holloway, I have advised the reporting party that filing inaccurate 911 reports is a misdemeanor under South Carolina law. She has been issued a written warning. I would advise you to keep that warning in mind in your future interactions with her." "I appreciate that, Sergeant." "And sir, welcome to the lake." He tipped his hat. He got in his cruiser. The 3 of them rolled out together. I watched them go. I looked at Tamsin on her porch. She was no longer smiling. She was, instead, looking directly at me with an expression I had seen exactly once in my career, on the face of a Class B captain who had just been called into a chief pilot meeting and did not yet know why. I picked up the box of Beckett's books. I carried them inside. I closed the door. I went into the kitchen, opened my closing folder, and turned to page 3 of the deed. Then I picked up my phone. I dialed the number from memory. It rang twice. Then a calm, slightly amused voice picked up. "Francis Stillwell." "Francis, it's Pierce." "Captain Holloway, welcome to retirement. How's the lake?" "Francis, I need to read you something, from page 3 of the deed." There was a pause. "Francis has been my attorney for 19 years. She handled the will when Beckett died. She handled my mother's estate. She handled the closing on this house. She knows the tone in my voice when something is up. Read it. I read her the paragraph. It was the third paragraph on page 3, in a section titled Appurtenant Rights. The language was the kind of careful, old-fashioned, lawyer's English that nobody types anymore. The grantor doth further convey and grant unto the grantee, in fee simple absolute, that certain access roadway commonly known and platted as Briar Bluff Drive, running from its terminus at State Route 11 to its terminus at the property hereby conveyed, together with all rights of ingress, egress, regress, and underlying easement, in perpetuity, the same to be held by the grantee as appurtenant to the lakefront parcel. There was about 3 seconds of silence on the other end of the phone. Then Francis said, "Pierce, read me that again, slowly." I read it again. Another silence. "Pierce, where are you right now?" "Standing in the kitchen of the Whitaker house." "Pierce, do you have your title insurance policy?" "Yes." "Open it, Schedule A. Tell me the legal description." I opened it. I read her the legal description, which described both the lake parcel itself and a pertinent fee simple interest in the platted private roadway designated Briar Bluff Drive. "Pierce." "Yes, Francis." "Sit down." I sat down at the kitchen table. "Pierce, you own the road, the entire street, from State Route 11 to your driveway. All 23 homes on Briar Bluff Drive have driveways that connect to a private roadway that is owned in fee simple by you." Francis. "Yes." "The HOA called 911 on me an hour ago." There was a long, low laugh on the other end of the line. "Pierce, that HOA does not know what it just did. How is this possible? How did a roadway end up appurtenant to a residential parcel for 56 years and nobody figured it out? Because nobody read the deed, Pierce. Howell Whitaker built the road in 1968 to get to his own house. He didn't dedicate it as a public road. He didn't dedicate it as a private community road. When he subdivided the upland parcels, he just left the road appurtenant to the lake house. Every subsequent buyer of the lake house got the road with the house. Every subsequent buyer of the upland parcels, including the developer who founded the HOA, assumed the road was either public or community. It wasn't. It was Howell's. Then it was the next owner's, then Lurlene's. Now it's yours. Francis, the HOA collects road maintenance fees from every homeowner. There was a longer silence. Pierce, how do you know that? It was in the HOA disclosure packet at closing. $392 a year per household, line item, road maintenance assessment. Pierce, that money has been collected for years on a private road they do not own. That is conversion. If the funds were transferred to a vendor, it may be wire fraud. Have you opened the HOA's annual financial filing? Not yet. Open it tonight. And Pierce, do not, under any circumstances, exercise your rights yet. Not a sign, not a chain, not a phone call. We need to research first. The HOA does not yet know they have lost. Let's keep it that way for a while. Just so I'm clear, right now, with a single recorded notice, I could close Briar Bluff Drive to all non-owner traffic by next Friday. Yes, Pierce, legally you could. And every homeowner on this street would be locked behind a chain on private property they do not own and have no easement on. Legally, yes. I looked out the kitchen window. Across the street, Tamsin Cruz Boutwell was getting into her white Range Rover. She was on the phone, talking emphatically. Francis, let's research first. Good answer, Pierce. They always escalate. They always do. Tamsin escalated within 48 hours. On Thursday morning, a single sheet of paper was tucked under the windshield wiper of my pickup. It was a violation notice on Briar Bluff Lake Estates HOA letterhead. The violation was that my vehicle, a 2017 Ford F-150 in a respectable shade of gunmetal gray, was non-conforming with the neighborhood vehicle aesthetic standard. The fine was $250. The notice was signed by Tamsin Cruz Boutwell, HOA president. I read it, I folded it, I put it in a manila folder marked BB-HOA, that I had set up on my kitchen table. By Friday afternoon, there was a second notice. This one cited my mailbox post for being improperly painted. The mailbox post had been painted gloss black by Lurleen Trask in 2019 and matched every other mailbox post on the street. The fine was $125. I added it to the folder. By Saturday morning, there was a third. A bedsheet I had hung to dry on the back deck the previous afternoon was a visible laundry violation, $100. By Saturday afternoon, Margot called. "Dad, are you sitting down?" "I am. What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong, but I'm coming up tomorrow, just for the day. Jasper's driving me. I want to see the lake house before the baby comes. Mom said you'd love a visit." I set my coffee down. "Sweetheart, you should know. There's an HOA president on this street who has already called 911 on me once for unloading boxes. She is, in my professional opinion, somebody we want to give a very wide berth to. Are you absolutely sure you want to be the second test of her judgment?" There was a pause on the line. "Dad, are you telling me I'm going to be the second test? You're going to be a pregnant young woman arriving with a black firefighter at a house she does not associate with our family. Yes, mathematically, you are likely to be the second test." "Dad." "Yes." "Then I'm coming." I laughed. Then I sat at the kitchen table and called Francis Stillwell back. "Francis, Margot and Jasper are coming up tomorrow. Pierce, make sure they bring dash cams, front and rear." Already on it. They arrived at 11 a.m. on Sunday. Margot was 7 months along and glowing in the way pregnant women glow in their last trimester. Jasper, 6'4", lean and broad-shouldered, came up the porch with one hand on the small of her back and a casserole his mother had sent in the other. He kissed me on the cheek. He has done that every visit since he and Margot got serious 3 years ago. He is the best son-in-law a man could hope for, and he is not officially my son-in-law yet. Although Margot has told me the ring is in his sock drawer in Charlotte, and he is, in her words, waiting for the perfect moment, which is never going to come, so I'm going to propose to him instead at the hospital. We were on the porch with sweet tea and Jasper's mother's casserole at 1:15 p.m. when the cruisers came up the drive. 3 of them again, Sergeant Crane in the lead. He got out slower this time. He walked up to the porch with his hat in his hand. He looked at Margot, he looked at Jasper, he looked at me. Then he closed his eyes for about 1 full second. "Mr. Holloway." "Sergeant." "I am here in response to a 911 call from across the street. The call reported a black male loitering at the Whitaker house and a possibly distressed pregnant white female being detained against her will. Sir, I owe you and your family a profound apology for the second time in 5 days. I do not need to see anyone's identification." Margot had begun, very quietly, to cry. Jasper put his arm around her shoulders. He did not look angry. He looked the way I have seen black men look in moments like that exactly 4 times in my life, which is too many. He looked patient. Sergeant Crane removed a small notepad from his breast pocket. "Sir, with your permission, I would like to formally interview your daughter and her partner as witnesses to a pattern of false reports. Their statements will support criminal charges against the reporting party." "Margot, do you want to?" She wiped her eyes with the heel of her hand. She looked at Jasper. Jasper looked at her. "Yes," she said. "Yes," Jasper said. I looked at Sergeant Crane. "Sergeant, take your time." He took 37 minutes. He left with 2 signed statements and a casserole Jasper's mother had wrapped a piece of for him in foil. That night, after Margot and Jasper had driven back to Charlotte, I walked out to the foot of the driveway. I stood on the asphalt of Briar Bluff Drive in the moonlight. I looked at the road that legally belonged to me, in fee simple, in perpetuity, and I made a decision. Tamsin Cruz Boutwell had chosen who she was. I was going to let her finish. The next 3 weeks I read everything Briar Bluff Lake Estates had ever filed in Oconee County. I started with the HOA's annual filings, which were public and sat on a shelf in the county clerk's office, under the watchful eye of a soft-spoken deputy clerk named Lavinia Threadgill, who had been at her desk since 1991 and had been waiting, she told me later, for somebody from that street to finally come ask a real question. The real question Lavinia had been waiting for was where the money had gone. The HOA collected 6 different annual line item assessments from its 23-member households. 5 of them were routine. The 6th was the road maintenance assessment, $392 per household, per year, paid every January due to the HOA General Fund. $392 times 23 households was $9,016 per year. The HOA had been collecting that line item since 2012, 12 years. Just over $108,000. I pulled the disbursement records. Every single dollar of the road maintenance assessment had been paid out in monthly installments to a vendor named Brookwood Property Services, LLC. I asked Lavinia, gently, who owned Brookwood Property Services, LLC. She slid a post-it across the counter. On it, she had written, in a neat hand, Patton Cruz Boutwell, sole member, registered 2012. I sat with that for a minute. Then I asked her if I could see the LLC's vendor invoices, which had been filed as supporting documentation for the HOA's tax returns. She handed me a folder. The invoices were not for road maintenance. They were for consulting services, community management oversight, and shareholder education. There was no record of any actual road work, no paving, no patching, no striping, performed by Brookwood Property Services, LLC. The only road work that had been done on Briar Bluff Drive in 12 years had been performed by Oconee County under a courtesy paving cycle in 2019. The HOA had been collecting an assessment for the maintenance of a road they did not own, paying it to a shell LLC controlled by the HOA president's husband, and producing no actual road work. That was the financial layer. The discrimination layer turned out to be uglier. While I was at the clerk's office on the second afternoon, Lavinia mentioned, in the way small-town deputy clerks mention things, that the HOA's community fit review process had generated a lot of paperwork over the years, and that the paperwork was technically a public matter because Briar Bluff Lake Estates was registered as a community organization under South Carolina State Code. She pulled a thick folder. It contained 22 rejected applications over the previous 8 years. Of the 22, 14 had been from black families, 3 had been from Hispanic families, 2 had been from single mothers, 3 had been from buyers whose income tax returns indicated a household income below $110,000 a year. I sat with that for a long time. The clerk's office was quiet. A wall clock ticked. Lavinia did not say anything. She did not need to. I went home that night and called Francis. Francis, the road assessment is mail fraud. The community fit rejections are a federal fair housing case. How many rejections? 22 over 8 years. Pattern. Send me everything. I'm calling DOJ tomorrow morning. I sent her everything. Then I poured myself a glass of cold water and stood at the kitchen window for a long time, looking out across the street at the white Range Rover in the driveway of the house that had, until that afternoon, belonged to the woman who thought she ran this neighborhood. She did not anymore. She just did not know it yet. For the next 6 weeks, I built the case the way I used to build a flight plan, in layers, with redundancies, with contingencies, and with the assumption that something would go wrong somewhere and I would need a clean diversion. Francis took the lead on the federal piece. She contacted a DOJ fair housing investigator out of the Atlanta regional office named Yvette Sandoval, a quiet woman in her mid-50s who had spent 18 years building fair housing pattern cases in the Southeast. Yvette flew in to meet me at a coffee shop in Seneca and spent 4 hours reading the rejected application folder. At the end, she closed the folder, looked up and said, "Captain Holloway, this is the cleanest, discriminatory screening case I have seen in 3 years. If you have the patience to let it unfold quietly, I have the warrant to make it federal." How long until indictment? 90 days from today. We will be patient. The other case was the road assessment fraud. Francis and I had decided to walk that to the Oconee County District Attorney first, where it would land as a state-level conversion and mail fraud case before federal jurisdiction widened it. The DA was a soft-spoken, older man named Quincy Halverston, a former defense attorney who had switched sides in 2008. He read the invoice folder, the LLC registration, and the public disbursement records in under an hour, and said, Captain, I want to take this. I will charge Patton Cruz Boutwell with mail fraud, theft over $10,000, and 3 counts of fraudulent vendor billing within the month. Mr. Halverston, I would like to wait 60 days to give the federal piece time to mature. He smiled, the slow smile of a man who has watched a lot of cases bloom on his desk. Captain Holloway, you are a patient man. I have flown a lot of long-haul routes. Meanwhile, I worked the neighborhood. I started knocking on doors, not all 23. I started with the houses Tamsin had been openly hostile to over the years, homes I could identify from her board meeting minutes, which Lavinia had quietly slid into my folder. There were 6 of those households. I introduced myself. I sat on porches. I drank a lot of iced tea. I told each of them plainly what I had found. 5 of the 6 told me, within 15 minutes, that they had been waiting 12 years for somebody to ask. One of them, a retired school teacher named Geraldine Marbury, whose adult son was a Pentecostal pastor in Atlanta, hugged me on her porch and said, "Captain, I have been refunding that road assessment in my head every January since 2014. Tell me what you need." From those 6, I moved outward. By the end of week 4, I had spoken to 17 of the 23 households. 15 had signed sworn statements supporting the road assessment refund claim. 11 had agreed to vote, when the time came, to dissolve the existing board. I also retained a surveyor. Briar Bluff Drive had never been formally surveyed against the parent parcel deed since 1968. I hired a licensed South Carolina surveyor named Ridley Birchfield, paid him $5,000, and asked him to walk the entire length of the road with his equipment. He walked it on a clear Wednesday in November. The map he produced was an extremely clean rectangle, from the curb cut at State Route 11 to my driveway gate at the lake. All of it. Mine. I had 3 copies made. I had the map recorded with the county under a deed addendum that Francis drafted. Then I waited. On the morning of November 23rd, Tamsin Cruz Boutwell took the final step that I had been quietly counting on her to take. Carlene had arrived from Spartanburg 3 days earlier. We were ready. Carlene heard the doorbell before I did. She had been at the kitchen counter, peeling apples for a pie Margot had requested in honor of Carlene's arrival. Carlene is 57 years old, gray-haired by choice, with the calm, steady eyes of a woman who has taught middle school history for 31 years, and has, on the basis of those 31 years alone, seen more human nonsense than most federal judges. She set down the paring knife. She wiped her hands on a dish towel. She looked at me through the kitchen doorway. "Pierce, is that her?" "It is. You want me to handle it. I want you to film it." "On it." She picked up her phone. She tapped record. She walked toward the front door 3 steps behind me, framing the doorway from a respectful distance. Carlene Holloway has been documenting petty tyrants since before I knew her. I opened the door. Tamsin Cruz Boutwell stood on my porch in a teal cashmere wrap and a pearl necklace, holding a glass of white wine in her left hand and a folded sheet of paper in her right. "Mr. Holloway." "Mrs. Cruz Boutwell. I have come to inform you that the Board of Briar Bluff Lake Estates has voted to commence formal removal proceedings against you as a homeowner. We are exercising our community removal authority under Article 12 of our governing bylaws. I have a particular face I used in cockpits during decompressions and engine fires. It is a face that says nothing, betrays nothing, and lets the other person hear their own words echo back at them in the silence I am providing. I use that face now. Mrs. Cruz Boutwell, Briar Bluff Lake Estates does not have community removal authority. HO, as in South Carolina, do not have eviction power. That is a matter for our attorneys. That is, in fact, a matter for state law, which I have read twice." Her mouth tightened. She raised the folded sheet of paper. "This is your formal notice." She tried to push it into my hand. I did not take it. She thrust it at my chest. The paper fluttered. That was when she did the thing. I do not think she planned the thing. I think the thing was the cumulative result of 3 weeks of escalating frustration at the fact that the man across the street had not yet collapsed. She lifted the wine glass. She tilted it. She poured the contents, about 4 ounces of a moderately priced California Sauvignon Blanc, directly across the front of my Carhartt jacket, my chest, and the leather toe of my left shoe. Carlene's phone never moved. Her hand was steady. I looked down at my jacket. I looked back up at Tamsin. "Mrs. Cruz Boutwell, you have just committed assault on my front porch, with a witness, on video." She blinked. She had not, until that moment, registered the phone in Carlene's hand. That is... "Mrs. Cruz Boutwell, please leave my porch." She tried to step forward. Carlene moved, very deliberately, into the doorway between us, still filming. Carlene is 5'4". Tamsin is 5'7", and outweighed her by perhaps 50 pounds. None of that mattered. Carlene Holloway in a doorway is a state of physics that resolves only one way. Tamsin stepped back. "Get off my property," Carlene said quietly. "Now." Tamsin got off the porch. She walked across the street to her own driveway. Halfway across, she turned to call something back over her shoulder. Carlene was still filming. Tamsin lost her nerve. She kept walking. The Range Rover door slammed. The engine started. The Range Rover backed out of her driveway. The Range Rover left Briar Bluff Drive at a speed that was not consistent with the posted signage. Carlene stopped recording. She lowered her phone. I called Sergeant Crane. He picked up on the second ring. "Mr. Holloway." "Sergeant, the reporting party from the 2 previous incidents has just thrown a glass of wine on me on my own front porch. My wife filmed the entire incident." "Mr. Holloway, I would like the video very much. I will be there in 11 minutes. He was there in 9. That evening, after Sergeant Crane left, after Francis and Yvette had both been emailed the video, after Margot had called twice and demanded to be FaceTimed in, Carlene and I sat on the back deck and watched the moon come up over the lake. She bumped my shoulder with hers. "Pierce, how long have you been waiting to do this?" 6 weeks. "And now?" "Now," I said, "I make one more phone call." The next morning I drove to a small print shop in Seneca and ordered 23 signs. 3 feet by 2 feet, white background, black lettering, weather-resistant vinyl on aluminum. The lettering read, "Private Property, Briar Bluff Drive. Owner, Pierce Holloway. Fee simple. Access by owner's consent. Recorded deed, Oconee County Book, 3127. Page 442. The print shop had them ready in 3 days. In the meantime, I sent a letter. The letter went by certified mail to every one of the 23 households on Briar Bluff Drive. It was 3 pages. It was polite. It was clear. It was drafted by Francis and signed by me. The letter informed each household, plainly, that the road they had been using for ingress and egress to their property for some number of years was, and always had been, the fee simple private property of the lake parcel at the end of the street. Then it made an offer. The offer was this. I had no desire to disrupt the lives of any of my neighbors. I had every desire to clean up the institution that had been quietly mismanaging this street for over a decade. To that end, I was inviting every homeowner on Briar Bluff Drive to a community meeting on the lawn of 14 Briar Bluff Drive on Saturday, December 7th at 2 p.m. At that meeting, I intended to offer every homeowner a free, recorded, permanent appurtenant easement, granting them right of ingress and egress in perpetuity, on the condition that the existing HOA board be dissolved and a new transparent board be formed, under reformed bylaws that explicitly prohibited any community fit review process, and that returned all wrongfully collected road maintenance assessments. The letter ended with the line, "I am not your adversary. I am your new neighbor. I am asking, with respect, that we fix this together." By Tuesday morning, 21 of the 23 households had RSVP'd yes. The 2 that had not were the Cruz Boutwell household, and one neighboring household belonging to Tamsin's longtime supporter, a retired oil and gas executive named Walton Pierce. The day before the meeting, 3 different things happened in the same morning. At 7 a.m., Quincy Halverston's office filed criminal charges against Patton Cruz Boutwell for mail fraud, theft, and conspiracy. Patton was arrested at his home at 7:30. The arrest made the front page of the Greenville News online edition by noon. At 8 a.m., Yvette Sandoval's office served Tamsin Cruz Boutwell with a formal federal subpoena for the fair housing pattern investigation. At 8:15 a.m., Sergeant Crane personally served Tamsin Cruz Boutwell with 2 misdemeanor charges and 1 felony charge for filing false reports, intimidation, and the assault on my front porch. By noon, 3 local TV stations had vans parked at the entrance to Briar Bluff Drive. The Cruz Boutwell family did not RSVP to my Saturday meeting. I did not expect them to. Carlene and I spent Friday night setting up folding chairs on the front lawn. There were 23 chairs. We placed them in a rough semicircle facing a small folding table where I would speak. We hung 2 work lamps in the cedar branches in case the December afternoon ran short on light. We laid out 2 coffee urns, 3 thermoses of hot apple cider, and a tray of Carlene's apple pie. We turned in early. I lay awake for a long time looking at the ceiling. Carlene was already asleep beside me. I thought about Howell Whitaker, who had built this road and this house in 1968, and could not possibly have imagined that the deed language he had typed on a manual typewriter would, 56 years later, end an HOA-run racial screening operation in a county he had never seen modernized. I thought about Beckett. I closed my eyes. I slept. The community meeting was at 2 p.m. on Saturday. By 1:58, all 21 chairs were full. I had not made a public speech in 8 years. The last one had been at Beckett's memorial, in the chapel at the Greenville Flying Club, in front of 240 pilots and family and friends. I had read a single page of typed remarks, and I had cried twice, and I had thanked the room for loving my son. I stood up at 2:03 on a Saturday afternoon on the lawn of my new lake house. 21 of my new neighbors were seated in a rough semicircle in folding chairs in front of me. Sergeant Crane stood at the back, in uniform, hat off, hands folded. Francis Stillwell stood at my left in a slate-gray pantsuit with a leather folio. Yvette Sandoval stood at my right in a navy windbreaker that read D.O.J. in small embroidered letters above the heart. Quincy Halverston stood a respectful distance behind, in a charcoal overcoat. Carlene was beside me, holding a clipboard. Margot was on FaceTime on the clipboard, propped up so she could see and hear. Jasper was visible behind her shoulder. 3 TV cameras were set up at the property line on the public side of State Route 11. They were not on private property, because the property they would have been on was mine, and I had not invited them. I cleared my throat. Good afternoon. My name is Pierce Holloway. Some of you have met me. I'd like to take 20 minutes to tell you the story of this street. I told it the way I used to brief a passenger emergency before takeoff, in plain language, in order, without omitting anything that mattered. I told them about Howell Whitaker and his 1968 deed. I told them about the road that had been appurtenant to my lake house for 56 years. I told them about the public records I had pulled at the county clerk's office. I told them about the $392 road maintenance assessment that had paid $108,000 to a Shell LLC owned by Patton Cruz Boutwell for road work that had never been performed. I told them about the 22 rejected applications. When I named the rejected applications, I named them by category. I did not name individuals. I said 14 black families, 3 Hispanic families, 2 single mothers, 3 working-class buyers. I said this neighborhood was, for 12 years, deliberately curated against the people who would have made it a better neighborhood. Geraldine Marbury, in the front row, was already crying quietly. I waited. Then I told them what I was offering. Every one of you, I said, will receive, by certified mail next week, a recorded perpetual appurtenant easement granting your household full ingress, egress, and right of access to your property over Briar Bluff Drive. In perpetuity, for free, recorded with the county, yours. A different kind of quiet settled into the chairs. In exchange, I am asking 3 things. 1. The existing HOA board is dissolved by majority vote today. 2. A new transparent board is formed under reformed bylaws that prohibit any community fit review and that operate under full annual public financial disclosure. 3. The unlawfully collected road maintenance assessment from the last 12 years is refunded, with interest, to every household that paid it. That refund will come, not out of your pockets, but out of the seized assets of Brookwood Property Services, LLC. I gestured to Quincy. He nodded. I am not asking for your forgiveness, your friendship, or your apology. I am asking for your vote." Geraldine Marbury stood up first. "Captain Holloway, I move that the existing board of Briar Bluff Lake Estates, HOA, be dissolved, effective today, and that a new transparent board be elected within 30 days. Is there a second?" A retired surgeon 2 rows back, a man named Theodore Hatcher I had only met once, raised his hand. "Second." All in favor. 20 hands went up, including Walton Pierce, who had RSVP'd no and shown up anyway, sitting in the back row, looking older and quieter than I had expected. Any opposed? No hands went up. The motion passed. A small ripple of applause moved through the chairs. It was the applause of people who had been waiting a long time to clap for something. The December afternoon was cold but bright, the kind of South Carolina winter day where the light feels like clean water on your face. Carlene poured hot cider into a row of paper cups along the folding table. Yvette Sandoval, standing beside Quincy, exchanged a small private look that I have seen prosecutors exchange exactly twice in my life. The first time was at a federal sentencing in 1998. The second was on my lawn. It was at that moment, in the middle of the applause, that Tamsin Cruz Boutwell appeared at the foot of my driveway. She was on foot. She did not have wine. She had a sheaf of papers in her hand, and an expression that was either rage or grief, and may have been both. She walked up the gravel about 10 feet. Sergeant Crane, very gently, met her there. He said something quiet that I could not hear. He took the sheaf of papers from her hand. He folded her wrists, very carefully and very professionally, behind her back. He walked her back down the driveway to the cruiser. She did not say anything. Quincy Halverston walked up beside me, looked at the seated neighbors, smiled the slow smile of a man who has watched a long case bloom, and said quietly, "Captain, well done." I sat down. The neighbors began to applaud. Carlene reached for my hand. I held it. Geraldine Marbury walked up to the table and put both of her hands on mine. She did not speak. She did not need to. Theodore Hatcher stood up next, raised his coffee cup half an inch, and nodded once. Then, to my surprise, Walton Pierce, Tamsin's longtime supporter, got up from the back row, walked the length of the lawn, stopped beside my chair, and said only quietly, "Captain, I should have known better 15 years ago." He held out his hand. I shook it. He nodded once at Carlene, walked back to the road, and went home. The legal aftermath was the cleanest I have ever seen in a small-town fraud case. Patton Cruz Boutwell pled to 3 federal counts and 1 state count, served 22 months at FCI Edgefield, and lost the Range Rover, the consulting LLC, and most of the retirement portfolio. Brookwood Property Services was dissolved by court order. Its remaining assets, about $140,000 in seized bank balances, and resale value of a small office building Patton had been renting to himself through the LLC, were liquidated and distributed back to the 23 households as restitution. Tamsin Cruz Boutwell pled to 1 felony and 2 misdemeanors. She served 14 months at the Goodman Correctional Institution in Columbia. She lost the house, the pearls, and the social standing that had been the only thing she had ever really owned. The Department of Justice settled the fair housing pattern case in March. Briar Bluff Lake Estates HOA paid $1.4 million in restitution to 22 families who had been discriminatorily rejected over the previous 8 years. Yvette Sandoval told me, later, over coffee, that it was the cleanest pattern settlement she had ever brought to closing. The new HOA board was elected in January. Geraldine Marbury was elected president. Theodore Hatcher took the treasurer's seat. The new bylaws were drafted by Francis Stilwell, pro bono, and recorded with the county the same week. They explicitly prohibited any community fit review of new buyers, mandated full annual financial disclosure, and capped any single line item assessment at $100 per year without a unanimous board vote. The road remained mine. I issued, through Francis, 23 recorded perpetual appurtenant easements, 1 to every household on Briar Bluff Drive, including, for the record, the household that had once belonged to Tamsin Cruz Boutwell and had since been sold to a young black family from Atlanta named the Whitlocks, who, when they moved in the following October, brought me a peach pie on their first afternoon. I have eaten that peach pie cold from the refrigerator at 3 in the morning, more times than I can count. I took none of the legal settlement money personally. The amount that flowed back to me was directed, by my request and by court order, into a new fund. We called it the Beckett Holloway Aviation Scholarship. Beckett, you may remember, was my son. He died at 22 in a small plane crash on short final at Asheville. He had wanted to be a commercial pilot. He had also wanted, very specifically, to one day teach low-income kids to fly, the way somebody had once taught his father. The scholarship pays for full flight training, ground school, written exam fees, and check ride costs for 2 students each year at the Spartanburg Community Aviation Program. We have funded 6 students in 3 years. 2 have gone on to regional airline jobs. 1 is studying aerospace engineering at Embry-Riddle. 1 is now a flight instructor herself. The first scholarship recipient was a 17-year-old named Vivian Whitlock, the older daughter of the family who bought Tamsin's house. She got her private license in 20 months. I sat next to her on her first solo cross-country in a Cessna 172 we had rented from the flight school in Spartanburg. Halfway across the Blue Ridge, she asked me to tell her the story Beckett had told me about the wind at Asheville the summer he was 16. I told her. The headset hummed. The Carolina hills rolled out below us in late autumn copper. She listened the way her brother had once listened. She landed at Hendersonville perfectly. I shook her hand on the ramp. She did not let go for a long moment. Margot gave birth in March of last year. Beckett Holloway Jeffries was born 7 pounds 3 ounces, healthy, loud, perfect. He took his first canoe ride with me on Lake Kiowee at sunset last June. 18 months old, eyes the same gray as his uncle's, holding a small wooden paddle Carlene had carved out of a piece of cedar from the lake house porch. He calls me Pop Pop. He thinks I own the lake. I tell him I do not. I tell him the lake belongs to whoever is willing to take care of it. He nods, the way toddlers nod when they understand something better than the adults around them. If you have made it this far, do me one small favor. If you have ever bought a house, or a piece of family land, or a quiet plot of forest, and your deed has a paragraph you have never bothered to read it tonight, before you sleep. The most important sentence in your life might be the one you have been ignoring since closing day. And if you want to see next week's case, the one about the HOA treasurer who tried to seize a Korean War veteran's pickup and ended up in federal court, make sure you're subscribed. We post a new story every week. I'll see you on the next one.
What really happened here is simpler than it looks. Pierce Holloway did not win because he was wealthy. He won because he was the only person on Briar Bluff Drive who bothered to read his own deed. For 56 years, a single paragraph on page 3 of a 1968 document has sat unread by every prior owner and every HOA member around it. The HOA president counted on nobody ever reading page 3. The lesson here is worth saying out loud. The most powerful documents in your life are the ones you cite without reading. When you close on a house, when you inherit land, when you buy a quiet acre of forest, read every page of the deed. Ask the lawyer what the old language means. Find out what you own before somebody decides to use it against you. If you ever have an HOA or a small town queen try to take what your family worked for, drop a comment and tell us. And if you want to see next week's case, the HOA treasurer who tried to see a Korean War veteran pick up and ended up in federal court, make sure you subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.